Run your tongue over your back teeth right now. Feel that groove where the dentist drilled last year, or the rough edge of a filling that's been sitting there since you were 16. You've probably had at least one cavity in your life, maybe 3. Maybe you're due for a cleaning you keep postponing. Now consider this. A person living 20,000 years ago, who never owned a toothbrush, never heard of fluoride, never once sat in a dentist's chair, likely had a healthier mouth than you do right now. That should stop you for a second. No floss, no mouthwash, no dental insurance, and somehow better teeth than the guy chewing sugar-free gum on his commute this morning. It doesn't add up. You'd expect a mouthful of rotting stumps from a life with zero dental hygiene as we understand it. Instead, researchers digging through ancient skeletons keep finding something almost embarrassing for modern dentistry, jaw after jaw, with barely a cavity in sight. So what changed because something clearly did? Somewhere between the campfires of hunter-gatherers and the waiting room of your dentist's office, human teeth went from remarkably resilient to alarmingly fragile. This isn't a small twist in a minor corner of anthropology. This is a pattern that runs through every mouth on the planet today, including yours, and it stretches back further than most people would guess. Bone evidence, going back tens of thousands of years, and the very first attempts at actual dental repair dating back roughly 9,000 years. Somewhere in that gap between then and now, our mouths turned into a battlefield, and almost nobody stops to ask why the battlefield only opened up recently. There are 3 separate threads that explain this, and each one on its own sounds almost unbelievable. One is about what completely disappeared from ancient diets that's now sitting in almost everything you eat. One is about the first tools humans ever used on their own teeth, long before metal or nylon existed. And one is about the very first dental surgery in human history performed with equipment you would never let near your mouth today. Stack those 3 together, and you get the real answer to why your ancestors, with none of your technology, might have smiled with straighter, cleaner teeth than you do. Start with the diet, because that's where the whole story cracks open. For most of human history, people ate wild meat, roots, nuts, fibrous plants, seasonal fruit, tough food that took real chewing. Researchers examining the teeth of hunter-gatherer populations have consistently found something startling: cavity rates that are a small fraction of what shows up in farming populations. We're not talking a slight improvement. We're talking a difference so large that early agricultural skeletons look, dentally, like a different species compared to the foragers who came before them. Then agriculture arrived, and everything shifted. Grain-based diets, wheat, barley, rice, corn, flooded the mouth with starch, and starch breaks down into sugar the moment it hits saliva. Suddenly, bacteria in the mouth had a constant, reliable buffet. Cavities that were rare became common almost overnight on the timescale of human history. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Agriculture is the thing we credit with. Civilization, cities, surplus food, the rise of everything you associate with progress. And it's also, very plausibly, the thing that rotted humanity's teeth for the first time. So if wild diets protected teeth, why didn't that protection last forever? Why didn't we just keep eating like that? Because once farming took hold, there was no going back. Populations grew, food surplus fed more mouths, and those mouths inherited a diet built around exactly the substance that feeds decay. The protection from the old diet vanished right as the population, depending on teeth, exploded in size. That's the trade nobody signed up for. Which raises an obvious problem. If people were suddenly getting far more cavities, how did they cope with zero modern dentistry? This is where it gets almost funny, in a bleak way. Long before toothbrushes existed, people were already using something remarkably similar. Chew sticks, twigs from specific trees, frayed at one end into a brush-like texture, were used to physically scrub the teeth and gums. And some of these plants, like the ones used in miswak traditions, actually contain natural antibacterial compounds. This wasn't a modern health food trend. This is an ancient, cross-cultural habit, showing up independently in different regions, long before dental science understood what plaque even was. People figured out, through pure trial and observation, that scraping the mouth with the right stick made a difference. Somehow, an unwashed hunter-gatherer with a twig had a better daily oral care routine, functionally, than a lot of people who own an electric toothbrush and still forget to use it. But a stick can only do so much. What happens when the damage is already done, when a cavity has burrowed in and the pain is unbearable? This is where the story stops being about prevention and turns into something closer to horror. Because ancient people didn't just endure rotten teeth helplessly. At a site called Mehrgarh in what's now Pakistan, archaeologists found molars roughly 9,000 years old, with tiny, precise holes drilled straight into them, evidence of dental treatment, using what was essentially a primitive bow drill, the same kind of tool used for woodworking, aimed instead at a living human tooth. No anesthesia, no numbing gel. Just someone holding another person's head still while a stone-tipped drill spun into enamel. Sit with that for a second. Somewhere, 9,000 years ago, a person consciously chose to have their tooth drilled while fully conscious because the alternative, an untreated abscess spreading infection through the jaw and into the bloodstream, was worse. That's not primitive ignorance. That's someone making an informed, painful trade to survive. It reframes the whole idea of ancient medicine. These weren't people randomly poking at their mouths. They understood cause and effect well enough to intervene surgically. And it didn't stop at drilling. In Slovenia, researchers identified a human tooth roughly 6,500 years old with a cavity that had been packed with beeswax functioning, essentially as a filling. Beeswax, something you might associate with candles or lip balm, deliberately pressed into a cracked, decaying tooth to seal it and reduce pain and sensitivity. This is, as far as current evidence shows, the earliest known dental filling in human history. Long before amalgam, long before porcelain crowns, someone looked at a broken tooth and thought, seal it the way you'd seal a leak. Here's where the story usually loses people. Because it sounds too tidy, ancient humans just naturally had great teeth. End of story. But that's not quite right either, and this is the objection worth sitting with. Life before modern dentistry wasn't some flawless utopia of perfect smiles. Teeth still wore down heavily from grit in stone-ground food, from using teeth as tools to soften hides or grip cordage, from sheer age without any repair options for cracks and breaks. The advantage foragers had wasn't perfect dental health. It was a dramatically lower rate of one very specific, very preventable problem: decay, driven by sugar and starch. That's a narrower claim, but it's a far more interesting one, because it points directly at what actually causes most of your own dental problems today. Now, stretch this out even further, because the story doesn't stop at ancient farmers. This same patterned diet quietly rewriting the health of your mouth has kept repeating, and it's still repeating on you right now, just with far more sugar involved than any early farmer ever touched. Refined sugar entered mass human diets on a scale ancient people never experienced, not gradually over a slow agricultural transition, but rapidly, industrially, within the last couple of centuries. Where an early farmer's mouth was under siege from starch a few times a day, your mouth today is exposed to refined sugar constantly in coffee, in sauces, in something as basic as bread, sometimes a dozen separate sugar exposures before lunch. Every single one of those exposures is a feeding event for the same bacteria that plagued early farmers, just with a far richer food source and far more frequent access. If agriculture cracked open the door to tooth decay, modern food manufacturing kicked it fully off its hinges. And this is where the twist finally lands with its full weight. The people we tend to picture as primitive, gnawing raw meat around a fire, no soap, no medicine, dying young were, in this one specific and very personal way, ahead of you. Their mouths, on average, endured less decay than yours does, not because they were healthier overall or lived easier lives, but because their food simply didn't hand bacteria the same constant sugar supply yours does every day. The dentist chair you dread, the filling that aches in cold weather, the whitening strips, the mouthwash, all of it exists largely to manage a problem that barely existed before humans started farming grain, and that exploded once we started refining sugar. Your ancestors weren't blessed with better biology. They were cursed with a harder life and, almost by accident, a kinder diet for their teeth. There's something strangely humbling in that. We tend to measure progress as a straight line upward: better tools, better medicine, better lives. And in most ways, that's true. But your mouth carries a quiet counter-argument every time you bite into something sweet. Somewhere behind your own reflection, in the ridge of every filling and the ache of every root canal, there's an older mouth, chewing tougher food, scraping itself clean with a twig from a tree, keeping something intact that yours has to fight constantly to protect. You didn't inherit weaker teeth. You inherited a world your teeth were never designed to eat in.